Okay, so as you can see, I have finally finished this massive, scary looking poster. As it's broken down, it will not be scary. And I am basically I actually redid it again. So I think this is like the seventh time. I probably went a little overboard. I wish I would have started with this, but we are where we are. And I like that we did kind of our simplistic in the beginning and then we're building onto it. Because as I went through this process, I was able to kind of see not what's not important, but what can be left out and what is really important. So actually, this process, even though it took my entire Sunday, it really, I think, is going to help in the big picture of me not wasting time, nothing's really a waste of time in most components, but wasting time teaching things that may not be something that is going to stick, and therefore teaching kind of the negative and positive feedback. Who cares? Does it really matter? Are you ever going to explain that to a patient? No. I'm going to like give you the definition, but I'm not going to test you on it. I'm not going to ask you about it. The point of this poster is basically to kind of go over the highlights, get into a little bit more depth than we did last week, and have something to actually look at. I know it's hard to read, and I am going to hone in on certain things. So just wanted to let you know that. Okay, so there's the introduction. I'm going to pause it because I'm going to have a delivery any minute and I don't want the dogs to bark. So I will be back in just a second. Let me just pause you. Okay, well, delivery didn't come yet, but let's just continue here. Okay, so I kind of honed in a little bit so it's easier to see. So basically, if you see, I have kind of like a key up here, the word HR, it's not heart rate, it actually means releasing hormone. This is the endocrine system that we're talking about. And please use your textbook for the reference of having the body on there. I could not fit everything on it, and then I kept messing it up. So I just decided to use words rather than have the body drawn out. So, okay, I'm trying to keep this down short and do my very, very best. I switched it from 3 videos to 2, and now I think I'm going to have to go back to 3 now looking at it all. However, you will notice that some of them, such as the pancreas, the pineal gland, and the thymus, I have very, very little on, and there's a reason for that. The thymus, we talked mostly about in immunity. The pancreas, you're going to get in chapter 40. That's basically what it completely is, and we know a lot about it. So I didn't really want to talk too much about it right now. I want to talk about other things that we have not had the opportunity to really discuss. And then the last one would be I know I say it a little bit different, but the pineal gland. And we talked a little bit about that on the video last week, and it does certain other little things here and there, but the basic thing that most people connect it with, and unless you're in a specialty, we'll talk about what that is, and it has to do with the melatonin and the circadian rhythm. Okay, so starting at the top here, we're going to be looking at the hypothalamus. And I said this yesterday when I was just talking, a lot of the time you'll hear kind of this almost not fighting, but kind of this interesting kind of back and forth. You'll hear people call the hypothalamus, which is hypo means below, so it's in the brain. So the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and pineal gland are all in the brain, as you can see if you're looking at your if you're following along in your book, and you can actually see the picture. So those are all in your brain. So hypo meaning below, hypothalamus. So you have the thalamus in your brain. That's not a gland. The hypothalamus is. So we have the hypothalamus here, and it's called the control center. And there is an actual reason why we call it the control center. And I want to explain that so that there's a little bit more understanding based upon the fact of what the difference of the hypothalamus is in compared to the pituitary gland. And again, I don't want this to become so overwhelming where it's like, oh my God, I have to remember that this is this and this is this and this is that and that's that and why and how and this and that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm actually trying to make it more simplistic so you can see things more in a black and white manner. Because it really is that is the nice thing about the endocrine system, which I actually really love. Right now it's not my best friend because I'm sick of writing the words over and over again. So knowing that the hypothalamus, as I mentioned, is, it is as far as the hierarchy, it is the control center because your hypothalamus in itself and the pituitary gland are connected. Well, what's above the hypothalamus? So kind of think of it like that as a hierarchy, someone above you, like think of like, we have certain jobs and managers and supervisors. We have the hypothalamus up here, which is the control center. And then off of the hypothalamus, connected, so it is actually connected, is your pituitary gland. So you have your hypothalamus control center and your pituitary gland, which is your master gland. And then I want to do a little bit more explaining of the anatomy of it, and then we'll get in more to what they actually do and how they communicate. Okay, so a little bit about the anatomy here that we've seen it drawn out. So a couple things that matter, in my opinion, in the big picture, and some things that don't. So here we are, we have our hypothalamus, our control center, which, what I do think is important about this, and you hopefully read this in your chapter, is that the hypothalamus, it has this very powerful control over many different endocrine glands in your body. So as I had mentioned yesterday during just the lecture with no pictures, no posters, no nothing, just me talking for about 20 minutes to kind of get the visualization before the poster, is that your glands are spread out throughout your body, right? So you can actually, your hypothalamus, it produces its own hormones, as I mentioned yesterday, as well as it produces these hormones in order to stimulate, usually it's the pituitary gland, that's why they're together here, right? So the hypothalamus is here and it says, okay, I'm gonna tell your anterior, that's what this A stands for here, is anterior. And it does say it over here. And then posterior, and then it talks about it more over there. So I just kind of wanted to let you know. So we have the hypothalamus here, which is our control center. It has a lot of control over our endocrine system. Make this just a little bit smaller so we can start to see more. And then I will hone back in as we talk about specific things. And then basically your hypothalamus, it may get a stimulus. As I said, this has a lot to do with something that I love, which is homeostasis. And it does run parallel, again, repetition with your nervous system. So what puts those together? Your hypothalamus, right? So your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland have a lot to do with basically putting your nervous system together with your endocrine system. And this is the part that I don't think you really need to remember, but so it makes sense if you're like, why does it say nerve over there and blood over here? So when your hypothalamus is communicating with your hypothalamus communicates a lot. That's why I wrote here, lots of communication between your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland. So consider them their best friends. They work together. They're there to keep you alive, comfortable, continue on. So they're very, 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 very close. If you need some sort of mnemonic, because hypo, I wish it was like a different name because it sounds less than. How I think of it is H comes before P, so H wins. Or H is hero, so H wins. So H is on top, hypothalamus is on the top, and basically tells the pituitary gland what to do, okay? So the hypothalamus can tell the pituitary gland to do things in one of two ways. It can either do it through blood or it can do it through a nerve impulse. So we've talked a lot about how our endocrine system communicates through blood. And this is where I don't want it to get like super, super, super confusing. So for the most part, this is just me showing you, okay, yes, some of them do have to do with nerves. Most of them have to do with blood. You're not going to get asked this on the NCLEX. a patient's, call me if a patient ever asks you this, or a doctor. You can go up to a doctor tomorrow and be like, ask them this question. Seriously, they probably won't know. Why I'm telling you is so you see it on this poster and don't get confused, okay? So now you know why I put this here. And I may mention it one more time when I'm talking about the pituitary gland and what its responsibility is, okay? Okay, so here we go. So we have our hypothalamus, control center. Now we need to talk about what does the hypothalamus produce? So the hypothalamus produces its own I've written this word so many times today, now I can't even say it. Glands, or sorry, hormones. So if we look at our hypothalamus, and I will make it go a little bit closer, and I made it bright, so hopefully everybody can see this. Otherwise, I mean, my voice is here too. So we have our hypothalamus here, and then we draw this over here, and we see it says produce hormones, and our hypothalamus produces these hormones here. Now, earlier we mentioned if we see the letters HR, that means releasing hormone. Now, many times in medicine, sometimes yes, sometimes no, there are words that are created to kind of provoke thought of what does that actually mean, or it must have something to do with the action that that part of the body will do. So this makes sense. So if this helps you, great. If it doesn't, pretend I never said it. So a lot of this is more how you remember things. I had my own way in nursing school, how I got my 4.0, but not bragging, but I did all throughout and almost still. But I have my own way, and to be quite frank with you, I usually would make like odd mnemonics or use rap songs or whatever it was that I could make it work. It didn't matter. And it's still stuck because remember, your hippocampus remembers that, the amygdala gives you the feeling, and then blah, blah, blah. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I'm just letting you know, you don't have to go by like what I'm saying. It's not right or wrong. It's how you can remember the system of how things are working. Now, do I want you to right now, I mean, if you want, of course, to take notes, I would take a screenshot of this poster. I think it's quite lovely. So, and I actually really do. I think that it kind of gives a good idea about what's going on here. So I don't need you to remember the, exact, okay, these 5 releasing hormones. So now that's a special word though, releasing hormone. And I've used that since way back when until now. If it says releasing hormone, more than likely, if you think of that word, releasing hormone, think of that right here, growth releasing hormone. Well, I know that we have growth hormones in our body. I know that there's certain disorders and whatnot that I'm not sure if that's tomorrow or next week. I think it's tomorrow. But that we've heard about, the very, 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 very tall people that grow very, very tall because they have a, let's say, tumor on their pituitary gland or something like that, or whatever, that might have an impact on the growth hormone and a growth releasing hormone. Now, remember what I said, growth releasing hormone and pituitary, because that's going to come back. So again, we have our hypothalamus, that's our control center. Over here, we know that our control center doesn't just control, it produces. And the reason it produces is because the hormones that it produces are controlling the hormones of the master gland, of the pituitary gland. And then the pituitary gland is the one telling basically the body to do this, that, and the other. I'm going to say that one more time. So we have the hypothalamus, which is the control center, that goes over here, has these 5 hormones that release into the pituitary gland, which is a master gland that releases, where is it? It's anterior pituitary. We have, remember, anterior and posterior. The anterior part of the pituitary gland then matches up, if you look at all of these, thyroid, ACTH, growth hormone, prolactin, and gonadotropin. Do you like how I can say no words, but I can say like all these words? OB was my first, like, yeah, anyway, okay. So if you look here, these match those, right? Like the words look familiar. So that's a big, big, big deal, because let me give you an example here. So we have our hypothalamus. It's here. It's doing what it needs to do to continue with homeostasis. Life is good. Yay. And all of a sudden, something needs to happen because we, let's say with a thyroid. So my hypothalamus through blood is going to go to my anterior pituitary gland. And it's because I know that my anterior pituitary gland, which you should know too if you read chapter 38, over here, there's a releasing hormone in my hypothalamus that's called thyrotropin. And this thyrotropin releasing hormone then goes from my hypothalamus through the blood to my anterior pituitary gland, which is my master gland. And then it is going to tell my thyroid stimulating hormone to basically stimulate that hormone, right? So my thyroid is now stimulated. So we're going to go over to my thyroid, and it's telling me to do something here, more than likely to release more T3 or do something with it. So that is kind of what we would call a cascade. Another example, I'm going to give a couple examples of this, of like how things communicate, and then go over what the actual glands do themselves. I am not going to mention every single thing that everything does. I'm going to give the bulk of it and the importance, again, to have more of helpful piece of memory and things that are really actually, in my opinion, going to do well down the line. Okay, so now we have our hypothalamus. And I realized that I need some prolactin. My body, I get a stimulus, right? Remember, this goes through stimuli. So I know that I need some prolactin, because prolactin, as we see, which we'll see when we get over there, why we need it. So we have hypothalamus here. It's going to travel that through the blood to tell your anterior pituitary gland to release prolactin. We go over here from the anterior, remember A is anterior, P is posterior, from our pituitary master gland. We go down here, prolactin, because I need milk production, because maybe I just had, I'm getting ready to have a baby. So it's telling me, okay, it's time, let's start producing this and whatnot. So my whole point of showing you this is, I'm going to kind of go out here a little bit. The whole point of really showing you the big picture is to know that your hypothalamus is your control center. It has a lot to do with a lot of the processes through your body, through your endocrine system. We call it the control center. I know I've said that probably 17 times since we started talking. I'm trying to get it through and through and through and through and through. And then our best friend is what? The pituitary gland. And our pituitary gland is the one that usually is the one that's going to go off and tell another gland to do something else. So how many hormones does our hypothalamus produce? Okay, we go over here. It produces its own hormones. It works. We like it. It's our friend. It's not just telling us what to do. It helps us to tell us what to do, because it's producing. It's working too. It's not lazy. It's actually producing things as well. The thyroid. Sorry, I have a lot of trouble with this word, but it has to do with the holding on to fluids and whatnot, which we will get to. Growth hormone, releasing hormone. Remember, releasing hormone means it's going to go somewhere so that it releases the hormone. Prolactin releasing hormone and gonadotropin releasing hormone. And all of those hormones, again, if you look, and remember, it's pituitary gland, but it's the anterior, not posterior. We're going to posterior next, which has something completely different. And then we go over here, and in the same order, it's the thyroid stimulating hormone, the ACTH hormone, the growth hormone, prolactin hormone and gonadotropin hormone. So they all, I hope that makes sense, that they all match. And if you feel any confusion in this moment, that's okay. At this point, if you're not grasping 50% of it, you need to go on YouTube and find some reputable sources to actually be able to explain this in a way. People learn differently. But through your book, and I'm just going to be very, very honest, you know, many instructors, we, like I said yesterday, we do not have, I mean, this is not like OB or psych or, you know, we don't have an endocrinologist on staff. Most of the time this is just done through slides, and I just didn't, and we just regurgitate the information and say, okay, memorize it. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make more of like the bigger connection of what's going on. So hopefully you can understand the bigger connection of what is going on. If not, I'm happy to do office hours even with a small group. I'm not an expert at this either, but I understand the bigger picture, and that is what is important. And that is what is going to make, again, you don't need to know like all of this, you guys. You're nurses. So you're going to be treating patients, right? So, sorry, I keep saying right. I've been in this endocrine system for like 5 hours now, so I'm a little bit like, woo, more than usual. So, you're nurses. So having some understanding, of course, of these glands and what's going on is absolutely important, because medication becomes important. If you hear the word T3, you should know that goes with the thyroid. If you hear calcitonin, you should know that that goes with the thyroid, as well as another hormone that we're going to be, or another part of the body that we're going to be talking about. And things should sound familiar. You may not know them backwards, forwards, and all of that, but they should sound familiar. And that's why we're doing what we're doing right now. Okay, so let's move on now to, we went through the blood portion of the anterior pituitary gland, and anterior and posterior, I'm pretty sure you all know that, but just in case you forgot, anterior means in front of, posterior means behind. And keeping in mind that the hypothalamus, if you actually took this from the brain right now, they're connected. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, they are connected together. The pituitary gland hangs down from the hypothalamus. Okay, so I'm doing this all without notes now. I'm just kind of like, I'm relaxing. So let's just kind of go through this, and I anticipate maybe 20 more minutes, and then we're gonna call it a day, and we're gonna talk tomorrow, and we're gonna have lecture, and yeah, go from there. Okay, so then we have our posterior pituitary gland. And again, your hypothalamus is still communicating with your posterior pituitary gland. However, it's doing it through a nerve. I don't need you to remember that. Again, I'm not going to test you on it. The NCLEX is not testing you on it. Nobody is testing you on it. You don't need to even remember that. Just pretend I never said it. I just wanted to, I almost didn't even draw, but then I drew the blood vessel and I was like, ah, man, and then whatever. And I wrote blood. So then I'm like, well, I have to write something. Otherwise, I'm going to get a million questions. So anyhow, your hypothalamus is now, whatever, communicating with your posterior pituitary gland. And if we follow our posterior pituitary gland, it goes right here. And now let's see what our posterior pituitary gland does, which we talked about last week as well. But we are reiterating it, talking about it, and I'm going to take it just one step further. So we did very, very basic last week, and you guys did so good. So you're already, I mean, you're already on it, and you're in it, and you're understanding it. So this is a very, very, very good sign. Okay, so we have our posterior pituitary gland that hangs down from the hypothalamus, and our posterior pituitary gland has to do with our antidiuretic hormone, which we usually will just call it ADH. And I love this word because I love when science does this. It actually just tells you what it is. Anti meaning against, diuretic meaning going to the bathroom, right? We know that coffee is a diuretic. So if I'm doing an antidiuretic, and diuretics make you go to the bathroom, like coffee makes you go pee a lot, or alcohol or things that want to get out of your body, we know it's the opposite. So an antidiuretic is going to make you hold on to urine output. And there could be many reasons that your body may want to do that, in good and in bad, right? So if there's a problem going on, again, if something's going on with your posterior pituitary gland, then you may be holding on to fluid, and that's not good because you could be getting edema, you could be having issues with your kidneys. That's not good. That's a problem. We need to take care of it. But it also could be good if you're very dehydrated and we need to hold on to it and whatnot. So just understanding what, if I just pointed at you one day in clinical and said, what's an antidiuretic hormone? That would be a hormone I would expect you 5 years down the line to know, be able to go and diuretic to know. Okay, and we know it decreases our urine output. I'm definitely gonna know if you watch this or not. Well, maybe not definitely, because you'll probably get it right anyway, but does this have anything to do with diabetes mellitus, antidiuretic hormone? Or wait, maybe I'm asking the wrong question. I think I am asking the wrong question. Put antidiuretic. I am, never mind. Pretend I didn't say that. Okay, and then we go down to our oxytocin. So oxytocin, the one thing I didn't put on here and we didn't really talk about, it does have to do with, you know, like when you have your baby and you feel just so gushy, mushy, lovey-dovey, oh, I love you so much, honey, to your spouse and the baby. And I mean, hopefully that continues. That's the hope, right? But it does, it has to do with human connection and love. But again, I'm trying to kind of stick to like the most, there's many other things in the body like dopamine and other neurotransmitters that do that. So I'm trying to focus more just on what the gland does in itself and not add too many things on here. But that makes sense. That connection makes sense, I think. So oxytocin has a lot to do with our uterine contractions. So we're having when people who choose to have a baby, oxytocin is going to play a role in that hormone. And milk ejection, so the milk kind of like that let down, and then not just the let down, actually the milk actually ejecting out of the nipple, right? So that's what oxytocin has to do. So your posterior pituitary gland has very little to do in respects to the anterior. So how I think of it is A is like an A+, right? Oh my gosh, you know so much, you do so much, you get an A. So that's how I remember it, because there's a lot more going on with the anterior pituitary gland. And P, I actually like because it has less to have to remember. And for whatever reason, I can remember these two together because one has to do with urine, and they're kind of all the same. They're all, if you will, private body parts. So that helps me remember that. So if it helps you, great. If not, think of your own way. That's great too. Okay, so we've kind of finished the top part here. So we talked about the hypothalamus being the control center. Its best friend is the pituitary gland. It is a master gland hanging down from the hypothalamus. We have our anterior, oh my goodness, anterior pituitary gland, as well as our posterior pituitary gland. And that our hypothalamus creates its own releasing hormones, therefore using our anterior pituitary gland to actually get it to stimulate the hormone so that it works. Okay. And so I already did the connect, like I gave an example of like 3 connections. All of these are basically connecting and doing things from the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. That's your job. I'm not gonna, I mean, I can only do so much. That's your job to read the book. And I'm doing this in order to kind of help you see it if you're struggling with it. But now we're just gonna kind of quickly go through some of these glands just as a reminder, because I wrote them on this poster and I think I'm gonna hang this poster in my house. Maybe I should laminate it. Okay, so even though there's 2 misspellings, my bad. Was not redoing it. Okay. So we have our thyroid gland, which I think is probably one of the most popular as far as what we talk about other than the pancreas. It sits in our throat. It's palpable. T3, T4 are probably the 2 that you hear the most of. One thing that just kind of throwing out there that again, I'm not going to test you on it, but I think it's important to understand is a lot of your T4, and I'm not even going to attempt to say the actual word, a lot of your T4 is actually turned into your T3. So you actually have a lot more T3 than you have T4. I think it's like 75 or 80 and 20 or something like that. So 80% T3, 20% T4 in general. And a lot of the times when we have our issues with our thyroid is we have too little of our thyroid, or something is going on with our thyroid stimulating hormone, right? So if your pituitary gland is not doing what it should be doing by telling your thyroid to excrete the thyroid, you can have a hypothyroid issue. Or if your thyroid in general is just not working how it should, you could have a thyroid issue. So do you see that connection there? So it doesn't have to be the thyroid. The thyroid could be working just perfectly fine. It could actually be your pituitary gland not doing what it needs to do in order for it to be, or your hypothalamus over here telling your thyrotropin releasing hormone to tell your thyroid stimulating hormone to tell your thyroid to stimulate the hormone to get that out into the bloodstream. Because remember, our endocrine glands go into your bloodstream. So keep that in mind. It doesn't mean just because a gland is not doing something that we expect it to do or expect its normal, function, it doesn't mean it's that gland. Because remember, we have our master gland and we have our control center. That, I wish I would have said that at the beginning. I really hope you're still listening. That's very important. Okay. So now I'm just going to go ahead and continue with a recap of what we learned last week. Another thing our thyroid gland does, which I think it doesn't get enough, how would you say, enough clout, is it produces calcitonin. Calcitonin holds onto calcium in the bone, and we have an antagonist to this in our body as well. So, and I'm going to connect that to it right now, which would have to do with your parathyroid. So we have our thyroid in the front of, I forget what that bone's called, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. It's palpable, you can feel it. Oh my God, you know what I'm talking about. So it's sitting on there, and you can actually feel it, and that's where you might get a goiter, or if you have too much thyroid hormone going on. And on the back of your thyroid, you actually have what's called a parathyroid. And my apologies, in my first video that I posted last Monday, I said that they were all, I think I said 2 in the front and 2 in the back, and I did correct myself. They're all in all on the back. I drew the 4 little dots because that's what they look like. And they're basically just 4 little glands that sit on the back. There's, I think it's 2 lobes on the back, and they just sit there. And they're basically, their job is it is the antagonist to calcitonin. So we know that calcitonin is in your thyroid gland up here, and it holds onto calcium in the bone, which sounds very normal, right? Because we have calcium in our bones. However, one thing I think that has been overlooked is that we also have calcium in the blood. So our calcitonin in our thyroid gland is what holds onto calcium in the bone. And this is how I remember it. Calcium to me equals bone. Thyroid I hear the most of in general in the world, like in my medical world. So I put those 2 together. Calcitonin, bone, thyroid, they go together. So I know calcitonin it's a part of the thyroid. Then I go to its little baby cousin over here that just kind of chills in the back, those 4 small little glands. And calcitonin, it's going to do something, obviously very important in this aspect as well. But it's going to choose whether to release calcitonin into the blood or not. And at first, and I'm being very honest. Last week when I read that before I did the lecture, I'm like, wait a minute, why do we need calcium in the blood? I totally forgot why. And it actually has some pretty important reasons why we have calcium in the blood. So And calcium in the blood, it's going to help basically with your muscle contractions. It does some other things as well, but the main, again, I'm looking at the main function. Knowing that it's important, of course, having calcium in the blood. I think we all know that. And just a little side note I put down here just to remind you that vitamin D helps with calcium reabsorption. That's why we usually say, to take them together. But here, calcitonin, as far as the thyroid, it's going to hold on to calcium in the bone. Parathyroid, if it's releasing it from here, and it's the same word, right? But it's where it's releasing it from is what it is told to do. So if it's releasing it from the parathyroid, it's saying, okay, I have too little calcium in my blood. I'm having issues with my muscles. And then you're going to release calcium in the blood in the way of calcitonin. Calcitonin equals keeps or releases calcium in the blood. So your body tells yourself, again, homeostasis, what to do, which is very, very important. And it's doing all of this without you even knowing it, which is, I think, fabulous. You wouldn't want to know every time something is happening in your body because hundreds of things are happening all at once. Okay, I'm only going to go over a little bit more. I'm not going to go over this whole thing because you guys can take a snapshot. Like the luteinizing hormones and all of this. We know what the testes are for. We know what the ovaries are for. We know what all that for. We know what the pancreas is for. Adrenal gland is very important. It has one way which helps me remember is that we have the cortex and the medulla. So we have two parts. We have our kidneys. The adrenal gland lays on top of the kidneys, or is attached. It doesn't just lay. It attaches to the kidneys on top. And I think of cortex as it's like a shell. I actually wrote it right here. It's like a shell. And then the medulla, well, the shell is obviously outer. And so the only other thing would be inner. So it's the inner. And just remembering that what the two different parts do. So basically, I'm going to start with the inner part. It has to do with the norepinephrine and epinephrine. And that's the fight or flight, the whole bear in the woods. It's mimicking your sympathetic nervous system to do what it needs to do to survive. The top one, the cortex, it has to do with cortisol. And one thing that I find very interesting that, as I talk about this a lot actually when I teach about addiction and the brain and stress hormones, because it actually has a lot to do with it, it's fascinating, is that cortisol, I think we hear a lot about, cortisol, it increases fat in your abdominal area. Well, actually makes sense, because if you think about it, cortisol comes with stress. What does stress do? Stress will release blood sugar into the bloodstream. And why is it doing that? It's because cortisol is telling it to, because cortisol is telling your body that you're under stress and you need energy. See that connection there? Beautiful. Maybe I'm just like a super nerd, but that just blows my mind that your body knows how to do that. Okay. This is probably one of the more confusing ones, and I really need you to read this in your book. Not that I can't explain it or want to, but we all need to do our own part here. So we have aldosterone, which we also call ADH. So remembering that water follows Na, so sodium, right? So water follows sodium. So what that means is that basically aldosterone is telling your kidneys when it needs to hold on to sodium. So it's going to hold on to sodium. Why is it holding on to sodium? Because it's telling it to hold on to water. So it's going to help with, it's also called vasopressin. You probably heard that word or that term used before. So it's going to help your whole entire blood volume of your body stay increased, because there might be a reason, maybe you're losing blood, whatever it is, it's helping your body hold onto fluid, which could be potentially life-saving. And it goes into more detail down here when it talks about the kidneys and whatnot. And I did add kidneys on here because it does release certain hormones, which one of my favorite ones is erythropoietin, which is a hormone that is secreted by the kidneys that increases the rate of the production of the red blood cells in response to having a low account of red blood cells. And some people that have kidney failure actually have to have the hormone put into them via injection or through a blood cell transaction, oh my goodness, oh my god, what's it called, transfusion. There you go. So, and this is just kind of my own little thing. I added it on because if you read it, I didn't want you to think, oh, she didn't mention it. I find it very fascinating because I've worked with a lot of these patients at Natividad at their clinic down there when I work at Hartnell, and it's a really interesting process. And anyway, I'm not going to get too far into it, but it does have to do with your erythropoietin. And then I do talk about the negative and the positive feedback loop. You can read that on your own. Remembering that the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and pineal gland are all in the brain. And then obviously look at the picture, please, to know where everything else is. Pineal gland has to do with melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone that helps us sleep. We have the highest peak around the middle of the night. But your body, your retina in your eye, it actually tells it's able to establish as it's getting dark. That's why it's harder if you like switch to graveyard shift or whatnot we're called knock now, to switch that, because you're so used to one thing and your body's telling you one thing when you're not doing it. So, and you can actually buy it over the counter, not considered habit forming, all that good stuff. And it helps regulate your, I always said it wrong. Lizette said it so beautifully. Circadian rhythm. Yeah. So that is what I'm going to say right now. I think that between the lecture that we had last week, this lecture, you reading, and what we do tomorrow should make a lot of sense. You have this here. I'm going to see if I can move this thing so you can get like the full picture if you want it. You don't need to see all that. So here's the full picture if you'd like it. I think it's fabulous. I am not testing you deep, okay? But I want you to understand the connections, please. And although I may be a little bit of an easier tester right now, I hope you notice it's getting a little bit harder because I started off light. I'm going a little bit heavier. And yeah, so I hope this kind of puts some things into perspective, and I hope this helped in some way. I spent a lot of time on it, and I look forward to talking about it tomorrow, and I will probably pop this up on the screen just for fun. And yeah, hope you have a good night. I think I'm going to eat something because I don't think I've eaten anything today. So I hope you all have a good day or a good night, and I will see you hopefully in the morning in our class. Thanks so much. Have a good night. Bye.